The explosion that rocked the field hospital threw everyone to the ground, sending medical equipment crashing and patients screaming in pain. As dust settled and emergency lighting flickered, the medical staff struggled to maintain order. That's when a piece of debris caught Lisa's uniform, tearing it from shoulder to spine. What the panicked soldiers saw beneath made them forget their injuries entirely, an elaborate back tattoo that told the story of operations no SEAL was supposed to survive, let alone a woman who shouldn't have existed. Hospital Corpsman Second Class Lisa Rodriguez had spent 18 months at Forward Operating Base Reaper in Afghanistan's Helmand province, treating everything from routine infections to catastrophic battlefield injuries. At 29, she possessed the kind of clinical competence that came from extensive medical training and exposure to trauma that would break lesser practitioners. Her colleagues respected her steady hands, her calm under pressure, and her ability to keep wounded soldiers alive until they could reach advanced medical facilities. What they didn't know was that Lisa's medical expertise hadn't come from textbooks or residency programs. She'd learned battlefield medicine the hardest way possible, as the only female operator ever to serve with SEAL Team SX's most classified unit. The field hospital at FOB Reaper was a testament to military medical efficiency, a collection of reinforced tents and portable equipment that could handle everything from minor wounds to complex surgical procedures. Lisa worked the night shift, when the majority of casualties arrived from operations conducted under cover of darkness. She preferred the quiet intensity of night duty, the focus required to stabilize critically wounded operators while managing the controlled chaos that defined battlefield medicine. Her patients included Marine infantry, Army Rangers, Special Forces operators, and occasionally, personnel whose unit patches she didn't recognize and whose missions she wasn't supposed to ask about. Lisa treated them all with the same professional competence, never asking unnecessary questions, never showing recognition when familiar faces appeared on her treatment table. Because in her previous life, she'd been on the other side of that relationship. Master Sergeant Jake Sullivan was typical of the special operations personnel who rotated through Lisa's treatment area. A 12-year veteran with multiple combat deployments, Sullivan had the kind of wounds that told stories about close-quarters combat and operations that pushed human endurance to its limits. When he arrived with shrapnel injuries from an IED blast, Lisa worked on him with the methodical precision that had earned her reputation as the best trauma medic on the base. "Doc, you've got steady hands," Sullivan observed as Lisa cleaned debris from his wounds. "Where'd you train?" "Navy Medical Corps," Lisa replied, which was technically true but incomplete. "Standard battlefield trauma certification." Sullivan nodded, accepting the explanation while Lisa continued her work. He had no idea that the medic treating his injuries had once served alongside operators with similar wounds, in similar circumstances, conducting operations that had required the same level of medical expertise she was demonstrating now. "You seem pretty comfortable with combat injuries," Sullivan continued, noting how Lisa navigated around damaged tissue with the confidence of someone who'd seen similar trauma before. "Most medics take longer to develop that kind of intuition." Lisa didn't respond immediately, focusing on suturing a particularly complex laceration. The truth was that she developed her medical intuition during operations where the nearest hospital was hundreds of miles away, where keeping team members alive meant learning advanced trauma procedures under conditions that would challenge experienced surgeons. "Afghanistan teaches you quickly," she said finally, which was true from multiple perspectives. Captain Maria Santos, the field hospital's chief medical officer, had noticed Lisa's unusual competence with combat trauma almost immediately. Santos was a career Navy medical officer with 15 years of experience, and she'd learned to recognize different types of medical training based on technique, decision-making patterns, and stress responses. "Rodriguez," Santos said during a quiet moment between patients, "your trauma protocols are more advanced than standard corps training. You handle penetrating wounds like someone with surgical experience. Lisa paused in her equipment preparation, considering her response carefully. I've had additional training, ma'am. Advanced trauma certification through special programs. Santos nodded, but her expression suggested she wasn't entirely satisfied with the explanation. Special programs? Classified medical training, Lisa replied, which was true. SEAL Team 6 medical training was classified at levels that didn't officially exist. Can't really discuss specifics. Santos accepted this explanation with professional understanding. Military medical personnel often received specialized training that came with security restrictions. But Lisa could see the curiosity in her superior's eyes, the recognition that her capabilities exceeded what standard military medical education typically produced. The truth was more complex than either Sullivan or Santos suspected. 3 years earlier, Lisa Rodriguez had been the first and only female operator ever selected for SEAL Team 6's most classified medical unit. Her recruitment hadn't followed normal military channels. She'd been identified through intelligence community contacts after demonstrating exceptional performance in both medical training and psychological evaluations that measured adaptability to extreme stress. SEAL Team 6's Medical Specialist Program was designed to embed advanced trauma capabilities within small units conducting operations where traditional medical support was impossible. These operators needed to maintain peak combat effectiveness while possessing surgical-level medical skills that could keep team members alive under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Lisa's selection had been controversial within special operations communities that had never included female operators. But her performance during training had silenced critics who questioned whether women could handle the physical and psychological demands of Tier 1 operations. For 36 months, Lisa had served with units whose missions were classified above congressional oversight levels. She'd conducted medical support for operations in locations that didn't appear on official maps, treating injuries that resulted from combat techniques that weren't acknowledged in public military doctrine. Her teammates had called her Stitch, both for her medical skills and her ability to hold operations together when everything went wrong. She'd performed emergency surgery in Afghan caves, treated hypothermia injuries during Arctic operations, and managed combat trauma in urban environments where discovery meant certain death for entire teams. But Lisa's service with SEAL Team 6 had ended abruptly when a mission in Syria went catastrophically wrong. The operation had been routine by Team 6 standards: eliminate a high-value target who was coordinating weapons shipments to terrorist networks. Intelligence indicated minimal security, rapid insertion and extraction, low probability of complications. The intelligence had been wrong. Lisa's team had walked into an ambush that killed 3 operators and left 2 others critically wounded. She'd spent 6 hours in a bombed-out building, performing surgery with improvised instruments while enemy forces searched for survivors. Her medical expertise had kept her wounded teammates alive long enough for extraction, but the psychological cost had been devastating. After debriefing and psychological evaluation, Lisa had requested transfer to conventional medical duties. She'd wanted to continue serving, but in a capacity that focused on healing rather than enabling operations that inevitably produced more casualties. The Navy had accommodated her request while maintaining the security classifications that surrounded her previous service. Officially, Hospital Corpsman Rodriguez had standard medical training and deployment experience. Unofficially, she was one of the most experienced combat medics in the military, with skills developed in circumstances that would remain classified for decades. But those skills became relevant again on a Tuesday evening in March, when Forward Operating Base Reaper came under coordinated attack. The first indication of trouble was the sound of incoming rockets. A distinctive whistle that every deployed soldier learned to recognize and fear. Lisa was treating a Marine with a routine infection when the base's alarm system began broadcasting warnings about indirect fire. "Everyone down," shouted Captain Santos as the first explosions rocked the field hospital. Medical personnel dove for cover while patients who could move sought protection behind equipment and supply containers. Lisa's combat training took over immediately, her mind switching from medical protocols to threat assessment and tactical response. She could distinguish between different types of incoming fire, estimate distances and trajectories, and predict where the next impacts would occur based on enemy adjustment patterns. "Mortars, 81 mm, she called out to Santos, who was organizing medical staff response. "Pattern suggests indirect observation, probably adjusting fire based on previous impacts." Santos looked at her with surprise. Standard medical training didn't include detailed knowledge of enemy weapon systems or indirect fire techniques. "How do you know that?" Before Lisa could respond, a rocket-propelled grenade struck the hospital's main treatment tent, sending medical equipment flying and filling the air with debris and smoke. The explosion was close enough to knock everyone to the ground, and Lisa felt a sharp pain across her back as something caught her uniform. As she struggled to her feet, Lisa realized that a piece of metal debris had caught her scrub top, tearing it completely open from shoulder to spine. The emergency lighting cast dramatic shadows across the damaged tent, and as other medical personnel regained their footing, they found themselves staring at Lisa's exposed back. What they saw made them forget about the ongoing attack entirely. Across Lisa's back, from shoulders to waist, was an elaborate tattoo that told a story no conventional medic should have known. At the center was the SEAL Trident, the distinctive insignia earned only by operators who completed the most demanding military training in the world. But this wasn't just any SEAL insignia. Surrounding the trident were symbols that spoke to operations and capabilities that existed at classification levels most military personnel would never encounter. A skull wearing night vision goggles, indicating special operations conducted in absolute darkness. Crossed rifles with range markings that suggested engagement capabilities measured in kilometers rather than meters. A medical caduceus intertwined with tactical symbols that represented battlefield medicine conducted under fire. But most shocking were the operational markers, small symbols indicating specific missions and deployments that painted a picture of service with units that officially didn't exist. Afghanistan, Syria, Somalia, and locations represented by symbols rather than names, indicating operations that remained classified. Master Sergeant Sullivan, who'd been seeking cover behind medical equipment, was the first to process what he was seeing. His experience with special operations had taught him to recognize operational tattoos that told stories about capabilities and service records. "Jesus Christ," Sullivan whispered, his voice barely audible above the continuing sounds of combat outside. "That's Team 6 Inc." Captain Santos stared at the tattoo, her medical training forgotten as she tried to reconcile what she was seeing with everything she thought she knew about her subordinate. "Rodriguez, what is that?" Lisa stood motionless for a moment, realizing that her carefully maintained cover identity had just been destroyed by a piece of flying debris. The tattoo she'd kept hidden for 18 months was now visible to every medical professional in the tent, and there was no explanation that wouldn't raise questions she couldn't answer. "It's my service record," Lisa said quietly, pulling the torn scrub top around her shoulders without success. The damage was too extensive to provide any coverage. "Service record?" Santos repeated, her voice carrying a mix of confusion and growing understanding. "Rodriguez, your file shows standard medical corps training. Nothing about special operations." A young Navy corpsman named Williams, who'd been treating wounded Marines throughout the attack, stepped closer to get a better look at the tattoo. His expression showed the kind of awe reserved for legends that turned out to be real. "Ma'am," Williams said to Santos, "those aren't regular SEAL markings. That's Tier 1 ink. DevGru stuff." Santos's eyes widened as the implications became clear. DevGru, Development Group, was the official designation for SEAL Team 6, the Navy's most elite special operations unit. Personnel with DevGru tattoos were rare, and female personnel with such tattoos were theoretical rather than actual. "Rodriguez," Santos said carefully, "I need you to explain what I'm looking at." Lisa considered her options. Her cover identity was destroyed, but the security classifications that surrounded her previous service were still in effect. She couldn't discuss specific operations or capabilities without violating laws that came with prison sentences. "Ma'am, I can't discuss details. But yes, I served with special operations units before transferring to conventional medical duties. My previous service is classified." Sullivan approached carefully, his expression showing professional respect mixed with disbelief. "Doc, Team 6 doesn't take women. It's not a policy thing, it's never happened." Lisa met his gaze steadily. "A lot of things happen that aren't in official records, Sergeant." The conversation was interrupted by another explosion, this one close enough to shake medical equipment and remind everyone that they were still under attack. Captain Santos immediately shifted back to medical priorities, but her eyes kept returning to Lisa's exposed tattoo. "We'll discuss this later," Santos said. "Right now, we have casualties to treat." Over the next 6 hours, as the base repelled the attack and treated resulting casualties, Lisa worked with the same professional competence she'd always demonstrated. But her colleagues watched her differently now, noting details they'd previously overlooked. The way she moved during the attack, with tactical awareness that exceeded medical training. Her familiarity with combat weapons and wound patterns. Her ability to predict enemy actions and adjust medical procedures accordingly. Skills that made sense only in the context of service with units that operated at the very edge of military capability. As dawn broke over forward operating Base Reaper, Captain Santos called Lisa into her office for a conversation that would determine the next phase of both their careers. "Rodriguez, I need to understand what I'm dealing with," Santos said, closing the door to ensure privacy. "Your medical capabilities make sense now, but they also raise questions about your current assignment." Lisa sat quietly, her torn uniform replaced with a clean scrub top that covered her tattoo but couldn't erase what everyone had seen. "What questions, ma'am? Whether you're here by choice or assignment. Whether your medical duties are your primary mission or a cover for something else. Whether I've been supervising a subordinate or hosting an operator whose real mission I don't understand." Lisa considered her response carefully. The truth was that her assignment to FOB Reaper had been voluntary, a genuine attempt to transition from special operations to conventional military service. But explaining that would require discussing classified operations and capabilities. "I requested this assignment, ma'am. I wanted to focus on medical duties rather than combat operations. My previous service is over." Santos studied her for a long moment. "But your previous service wasn't standard SEAL training, was it? Team 6 medical specialists are urban legends. People talk about operators who could perform surgery in combat zones, but nobody's ever met one." Lisa smiled slightly. "Legends sometimes have basis in reality." 3 days later, Lisa received orders transferring her to a medical facility that didn't appear on standard military organizational charts. Her time at FOB Reaper was ending, but not because her cover had been blown. Instead, her demonstrated medical capabilities under combat conditions had attracted attention from units that needed exactly her combination of skills. As she prepared to leave, Master Sergeant Sullivan approached her with a mixture of respect and curiosity that had become typical of how the medical staff now treated her. "Doc, can I ask you something?" Sullivan said. "How does someone go from Team 6 operations to treating routine infections in a field hospital?" Lisa finished packing her few belongings before answering. "Sometimes the best way to serve is by healing instead of hurting. Sometimes warriors choose different battles." Sullivan nodded slowly. "But you're still a warrior." Lisa looked at him with the kind of quiet confidence that came from service in places most people couldn't imagine. "Once a SEAL, always a SEAL. The tattoo doesn't lie." As her transport helicopter lifted off from FOB Reaper, Lisa reflected on 18 months of maintaining a cover identity that had just been destroyed by an enemy attack. Her colleagues now knew that the quiet medic who treated their injuries had capabilities that exceeded their understanding of what military medical training could produce. But perhaps that was for the best. The men and women she'd served alongside deserved to know that their medical care had been provided by someone whose training represented the absolute pinnacle of military capability. The explosion that had torn her uniform had revealed more than a tattoo. It had shown that sometimes the most dangerous warriors chose to become healers, and that the hands capable of eliminating enemies could also save the lives of friends. Her back tattoo would remain a reminder of service that couldn't be discussed, operations that couldn't be acknowledged, and capabilities that would always be classified. But it would also serve as proof that warriors came in many forms, and that the most effective ones often chose battles that others couldn't see. As the helicopter carried her toward a new assignment that would again utilize skills developed in shadows, Lisa knew that her story was far from over. The medic's secret had been revealed, but the warrior's mission continued. Because sometimes the best way to serve was by being exactly what people needed, even when they didn't know what that was. End of story. If this story opened your eyes to the warriors hiding in healing roles, drop a like, share it with someone who serves in medicine, and subscribe to Silent Warrior Stories. Because sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones dedicated to saving lives, and their tattoos tell stories that redefine what courage looks like.